Good morning, Bookstagram. Today I am going to review the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which is the prequel to the Hunger Games series on Cornelius Snow. And apparently it's not Cornelius Snow. I thought it was all those years. It's like Coriolanus Snow, by the way. I think I just probably said Cornelius in my head because that's a mouthful. But apparently his family called him Corio. So, this book, I will say that the reviews on it are very, very mixed, and I did not let myself read the reviews until I was about halfway through the book because I knew I was going to read it anyway. So I didn't want to skew my perception of the book. I was really excited about it. I know a lot of people would have preferred Finnick's story. I think there were a few others that probably would be interesting, but we already know how those stories end. So I feel like this one was a smarter one to write because you didn't really know how it ended, not in his younger years. Obviously, we all know how he dies at, once he's president, but we didn't know how he got there. So that's why I think that Suzanne Collins chose to write his story, because it doesn't tie into Katniss's story at the point that the book ends, in which he's still very young and hasn't become president yet, but of course he's on his way there. So I will start by saying that it wasn't disappointing, I don't want to say, but it wasn't the Hunger Games. The Hunger Games has so many layers of meaning in it, and this one really doesn't. But I always love villain stories, so this one was very interesting to me. It was an interesting read. I liked it. I enjoyed it. It's not something I'd reread over and over again like I did the Hunger Games, but there's some really cool things about it. I will share, not necessarily a spoiler, but we know that Tigress was angry at the Capitol, and that's why she helped Katniss. We didn't really know why, other than that she apparently took her look too far and became unpopular with the Capitol. And I kind of wanted more of her story. And she apparently grew up with Snow and was his cousin. You'll find that out early in the book. That's not really a spoiler. But I wanted to know kind of what happened to her in the Capitol. So I wish the book had gone a little bit further and told what happened to her, why she became so angry. I would have been really interested to know her story because it ties in with Cornelius Snow's story. So I felt like that could have been a little bit better. Probably the coolest part of this whole story for me was where they tied in just slightly with the Hunger Games, and that was the song that Katniss sings, "Are You Coming to the Hanging Tree?" And that, the writing of that song was part of this story, his story. And I won't tell you how or why, because that would involve spoilers. I'm not going to spoil anything for you, but suffice it to say that when she sang that song in the story, it was haunting and spooky, and you could tell it was part of the history of District 12, but we didn't know how. You find out how and exactly what that song was about in this story, and so it makes her singing of the story, not knowing where it came from, just being part of her culture in District 12, so much more meaning, because you know now that when you read that part of the Hunger Games, she slapped Snow in the face and she didn't even know she was doing it. And I thought that was really, really cool. That was probably the coolest part of the whole story for me. And there are three sections, I guess, of this story. What do we call them? 3 parts. And part 1 is about how Cornelius Snow grew up with the name Snow, but not with the Snow money, because the original war, his family owned District 13. They built District 13. So when District 13 was bombed, they lost all their money, all their wealth, because all their wealth was tied into that facility at District 13. So then they had the name of Snow, but not the money of Snow. So he grew up kind of with the name and pretending to have the money, even though everybody kind of knows that he doesn't. and the struggle of him trying to live up to the Snow name. And then the second part, and it starts with him in, I guess you could call it high school, like prep school. And then the second part of the book is his mentorship. So the very first Hunger Games, they set up, or I should say, the 10th annual Hunger Games. Nobody was really watching. It wasn't having the impact they wanted to. So they brought in a group of students from the school, and they said, you know, y'all are going to mentor these district kids in the Hunger Games, and we want your ideas on how, you know, we can make this more meaningful. And so part 2 is probably by far the most similar to the first Hunger Games stories, because it's about actually the 10th annual Hunger Games, but it's from the mentor's perspective and not from his tribute's perspective. And I don't think it will be a spoiler to say that he is the mentor of the District 12 girl. You got to have that tie back into Katniss, and so that was very appropriate. The third part of the story is where I think Suzanne Collins lost a lot of people. That's the part that everybody tells me they did not enjoy. I liked it because I felt like that part 3 is where he turns. And when I say he turns, everybody starts out a child. Everybody starts out relatively innocent. But part 3 explains how he turns into the monster that he becomes. And I think I was really hoping that Suzanne Collins would make me sympathetic toward him. Maybe like something really, really, really bad happens to him, and that's why he is the way he is. Because I always have that villain sympathy. I love villains. I want to know their backstory. I want to see the moral ambiguity that they lived with, the things that make them the way they are. And so I assumed that when I read this book, I was going to find out that something really, really horrifying happened to him when he was a child, and that's what made him hate the district so much. Suffice it to say, that's not it. So if you didn't want to read this book because you were afraid that Suzanne Collins would make you like Snow, that is not the case. No. You will read this book, you will finish this book, you will have no sympathy for him, and you will still hate them. So that's a comfort if you still want to read it. And I hope that you do, because really the entire, I bookmarked the page because the part of the story that made it so worth it to me was, again, the song. There it is. Are You Coming to the Tree? And I bought 2 copies of this book. This one's my reading copy. This is the Target Special Edition copy. And if you have not gotten it yet, Target in America still has copies. So I'm sure if you're not in America, you can still get it. And the reason I wanted this one was because it's got this poster in it. The 10th Annual Hunger Games poster. And that is a really cool poster. I love that poster a lot. And so let's fold that back up in there. And then I got a copy to, I guess, a collector's copy. This is the Waterstones Edition. And it's yellow and it has the snake on the front. So you gotta love that. That is really cool. I don't think there's anything else super special. It's got snake end papers. And, you know, it's got to have the snake, which you'll also find out more about kind of how the snake ties into the story in the book, which is also cool. But I don't think there's anything else super special about this edition. It does have the snake at the front of the chapters, which is nice. And the cover for it, where's the cover for it? The cover for it is the same as all the other editions. It's still the green cover with the snake on it, Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. And you'll find out what that name means. When I first read that name, I was like, oh, Suzanne Collins is following the trend of you know, Girls of Paper and Fire, the something of something and something, which seems to be like the most popular way to name your book nowadays. And if it hadn't been popular, the name is still very appropriate for the book. I felt like you probably could have just called it Songbirds and Snakes, and that would have been cool too. But the ballad ties back into the music and how it plays a part in this story, because his tribute is kind of a carny. They don't call him that in the book. They call him something else. I forget what it is. But she was part of a traveling troupe of singer, actors, basically carnies. And they got stuck in District 12 during the war. And then, of course, after the war, they didn't let anybody leave their district. So they became District 12ers, even though they weren't really. They were more, and they didn't really consider themselves district. You know, there's district and there's capital people. They didn't consider themselves either one because they were a traveling troupe before that. So his tribute would be songbirds and he would be snakes, but really it could kind of go the reverse way. You'll find out how that ties in if you read it. But I just wanted to kind of show you the special editions. I will say that the American editions, if you have this set, which I've got all the dust jackets off for some reason, because they look cuter without the dust jackets. So this is the American version, and then here's the special edition version. It's the same size, so, and it ties back in to those. But the UK version is bigger. It's a lot bigger. So if you were gonna like make your own dust jackets or display them together and you've got the American set, keep an eye out for that. I'm not sure, I don't have the UK set of the original Hunger Games series, so I don't know if they're big like this, but this one's really big. I wonder, I mean, like it's got more pages too, so I wonder if the font is bigger. I'm gonna check that out real quick. No, it's not. The font is not bigger, it's the same size. There's just more spacing on the top and bottom of the pages. See? There's big gaps up here and down there, so probably the pages coincide with each other. So those are the editions, and that's my review of the book. I'd give it a solid 4. It wasn't life-changing, but it was enjoyable. I'm glad I read it. I'm glad she wrote it. I hope she'll write more. And that's all I've got to talk about today. So have fun, read the book, tell me what you think.